Okay, welcome. Um, Thank you everyone for joining. People are still joining. Thank you to everyone introducing yourself in the chat. Please feel free to do so. My name is Jenna Thomas. I'm the Advocacy and Policy Manager at Bike Cleveland. This is the third session in a series of advocacy trainings and conversations that we're doing. The first two covered giving public comment and power mapping. The one on public comment you can find on our YouTube. The power mapping one will be posted in the next week, as well as this one if you want to come back to it. And it looks like we've got all sorts of representation on the call from all over the region, which is pretty awesome. I love to see it. And today I'm very excited to be joined by Michael Kelly and Eric Borer. Michael from Kansas City, our wonderful partner at Bike Walk Kansas City, and Eric from Bike Pittsburgh. Two people that have been doing advocacy work for a long time and have seen some great successes. I'm excited to talk today. I think something that's come up in our previous sessions and for folks that took part in our Cleveland Transportation Academy, they really want to hear from more people outside of Cleveland, outside of just, the same voices that we've been hearing over and over again, often about why we can't have nice things, and hear about all of the great things that other cities are doing, and how their residents and advocates like you guys are helping make it happen. And so we'll start with some introductions from Eric and Michael, and then I have some questions, and then we'll open it up to the group. So Eric and Michael, if you just want to start with like a general introduction, that'd be awesome.
Who's gonna go first?
You're unmuted. Go ahead. Go for it.
Okay. Hi, my name is Eric Borer. I'm the Advocacy Director of Bike Pittsburgh. We're a 3,000-ish member bicycle and pedestrian advocacy organization. We work mainly in Pittsburgh and all the municipalities, which are like 25 that touch the city of Pittsburgh, roughly. Let's see, we do a whole lot of different stuff. We do the basics of advocacy. We also do an open streets, 3 open streets events, a big, huge bike ride, fundraising ride, and some education. We produce the bike map, a whole lot of stuff. And I've actually been involved in bike advocacy starting around 2001. I got involved in our local, I helped start our local recycle bike shop called Free Ride. And then several years later, worked over to Bike Pittsburgh. We were an all volunteer organization around 2005. And then I became the first paid staffer back then for like 10 hours a week or something. And now we're a full-time staff of 11. And I'll leave it at that and pass it on to Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Eric, and good evening, everyone from Kansas City. So my name is Michael Kelly. I'm the policy director for Bike Walk KC. There's a website in the chat. Bike Walk KC, we're the advocacy organization for walking, biking, accessibility, and transit issues in the Kansas City region. And for folks who may not be familiar, when I'm referring to the Kansas City region, I'm actually referring to the bi-state Kansas City region. There is Kansas City, Missouri, which is where we're based. There's also a KCK on the other side of the state line. So we do work on both sides of the state line. And so that includes 2 states, about 9 counties, over 100 municipalities, depending on how you want to slice it. And our work really falls into one of 5 areas. So advocacy, which is my wheelhouse, advocating for policies, plans, and projects. Education, we have one of the largest safe routes to school programs of our kind in the country. We also have a community planner on staff, which is a little bit unique for organizations like ours. But our planning director actually works with communities to help them develop things like walkability plans, bike plans, elements of comp plans. We also do data and research. So we have a community dashboard, and I'll drop a link to that in the chat as well, that covers some of the data around aspects of transportation. So how many disabled households, number of households without access to a car, high injury networks and things of that nature. And then the last big thing that we do is we run the area's bike share program. So we're in several communities across the metro. We're about 5,000 members strong, and I have been in this work since 2017. I did not own a bike prior to working here, but I had the opportunity to travel to Vancouver, British Columbia for a week with my wife. And we spent an entire week up there, and we only used the car once. Everywhere else we walked or we took the bus. I actually didn't bike that much when I was up there, and I'm sad to say that because I hear the trails are awesome. But we came back, and I was stepping out of my porch to go to the other job I was at the time. And I was just thinking, you know, man, why can't we have something like Vancouver in Kansas City? And so a couple weeks went by, this job posting came up for policy coordinator at Bike Walk KC. I applied, got the job, and 8 years later, almost 8 years later, I'm the policy director. So really fortunate to be doing this work with Eric and Jenna, and really fortunate to be sharing the space with all of you tonight.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so I kind of wanted to start, if you could tell me a little bit about what you've seen change on your streets in the past, 8 or 20 some years. Like, tell me a little bit about some of the new infrastructure you guys have seen installed. Yeah, what are some projects that you're excited to see built? Anything like that.
I can start on this, Eric, if you're cool with it. So I mean, the biggest thing, and this is something I think Cleveland obviously is working towards, is we have been slowly building in Kansas City proper, a network of protected bike lanes around the city. I'll drop the most recent one that we're really, really excited about is the protected bike lanes on Cleaver. This was a project that actually got its start back in 2020 when we were all shut down with the pandemic. Bikewalk KC took a moment to ask our members, if you could close any of the major gaps in our existing bike network, where would they be? And an overwhelming majority of folks said that they wanted to close the gap between our trolley track trail and our Gillum cycle track, which is an on-street cycle track that goes for about 3 to 4 miles in the midtown area of our city. And so from that, we started to have conversations with elected, start to build the support with our members. And there were a number of residents along Cleaver Boulevard, which is kind of the main thoroughfare between those two routes, that wanted to see additional improvements because they were tired of people crashing into each other, crashing into their houses. And so we were able to kind of build upon that momentum. And thanks to support we had from City Council, we were ultimately able to get that project installed. And the greatest thing about it is that we were able to gather some data after the project went in. It showed that pedestrian and bike traffic increased threefold since the project was completed. So that's just one example of something that we're really excited about here in Kansas City.
Love that.
Yeah, so I'll start first by like some of the challenges of Pittsburgh. As like Cleveland and KC, we're an old city. It's pretty well built out. There's very little space, and I dare say that Pittsburgh's probably even a little bit more condensed than than you guys. There isn't. We also don't have a straight line in the city between our 3 rivers and hills and mountains. We do have the steepest street in the United States. And due to that, we really don't have very many straight lines. Like, they just don't exist in our city at all. So with that, like, we've had to be really creative about how we go about a lot of our bike infrastructure. Major thoroughfares will go from 4 lanes, then 3 blocks later it's down to 1 lane. And so how do you improve that connectivity across all of the, when something changes so rapidly? So we've had to take a couple approaches. Like, the first modern bike lane we got in was in 2008. And from that point, that mayor was really good about trying to squeeze in bike lanes like wherever they could, without really changing a whole lot. But they did, squeezed in you know, they're like, wow, they found 5 feet here or 4 feet here, whatever that might be. The next mayor came along and we started working on our first protected bike lanes, and that was around 2014. Um, and then we got to the point where everything started being really hard because everything required either removing, car lanes or removing parking. And thankfully, we've had, some progressive, you know, visionary mayors who are willing to go to bat over parking and how parking isn't a right, and have done things like, even made parking more expensive in a lot of places, and removed it in a lot of places. And we've shown over time that parking removal hasn't really caused any problems for people. They can still find places to park. They can still get to where they need to go. But then we've also had to be really creative. And some of our bigger projects are more like ambitious ones, have all kind of tagged along to bigger projects. And we've been able to, through like policies such as complete streets and just sort of being at the table and being persistent and not letting up, making sure that things like protected bike lanes are included in those bigger projects. And these some of them take a long time, but some of them can take really quick. As some of you may have heard, we had a bridge fall a couple of years ago. It's pretty major, pretty major bridge. There were bike lanes that bridge carried. And I hate to say we were opportunistic on a tragedy, but we're opportunistic on a tragedy, and we're able to get protected bike lanes on the new bridge through the whole section. And one thing that another recent win was this took over 10 years. The city was reversing some really terrible highway designs from the 60s urban renewal. And then with that, we were able to get protected bike lanes, protected intersections, a whole lot of great features through that. And then starting next year, I did lie. Maybe there is one straight line in the city, 5th and Forbes Avenue. And there's going to be just like Cleveland, they're going to be putting bus rapid transit along that corridor. But we were able to work with our transit authority. And because they're rebuilding the whole street curb to curb, we're able to get in some protected bike lanes from that. And those will be the longest stretch protected bike lanes in the whole city. Because those streets actually do maintain the same width throughout almost the whole corridor. Yeah, I'll end there, but that sort of hopefully paints a picture of how things have sort of been pieced together. And I'm sure you guys are very familiar with how things get pieced together, and we are still piecing it together. We have a lot of missing gaps.
Yeah, awesome. So on the call right now, we have mostly advocates. We have a couple that also double as like city and county employees, but these are a lot of folks that are chapter members, part of our Better Street committees, which are resident-led kind of community groups. And so I'm curious if you could tell us about some of the main ways that just residents, advocates have been involved in winning some of these projects or other projects that you might not have mentioned. Who wants to go? Michael, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I definitely believe that one of the things that we say a lot with Bike Walk KC is that advocacy is a team sport. Nothing happens because of me, it happens because of we. And I firmly believe that, like, residents, everyday folks are the reason that the vast majority of the improvements that we talk about are getting going and they're happening. It includes everything from answering initial questions to helping someone figure out how to advocate to helping them build a coalition themselves. And I can tell you a story really quick to kind of encapsulate all this. There's a woman named Leah Moggins who lives on the Kansas side. She was walking with her son several years ago when he was trying to cross the street that didn't have a crosswalk. He was struck and injured by a driver. Thankfully, he's okay. But Leah, understandably, went into mom mode and was pissed. And she said, how can I get a crosswalk here? And so we worked with her to help her begin having conversations with the public works director. Got turned away because it wasn't up to code. She went to we told her to go to a public works committee meeting and talk about her issues. And she did. She went to 3 meetings by herself and then 2 more meetings with her neighbors. We helped her to build a rapport with her neighbors. She had never done that sort of outreach, but we said, if you want to get these things done, you can't be the only one who's talking about this. And so we worked with her over a course of months, and we were able to help her secure a win. She was not only able to get a crosswalk with signage installed at the spot where her son was injured, but the city adopted a crosswalk installation policy so no one else would have to go through the ordeal she went through. So when we talk about the need and the importance of residents, a lot of the work that Bike Walk KC does is resident driven. It is not us saying that this is a priority. It is very much us responding to a resident or a group of residents said, we have an issue here and we need Bike Walk KC's help to advocate for positive changes.
Yeah. Can I ask a follow-up before you start, Eric? I'm curious, like, what have you found as far as how people respond to, you know, Bike Walk KC employees versus residents? Like, and also, is it different if it's an elected official versus like a city employee? Like, yeah.
So what I'll say is I'll start by saying that, you know, because we're Bike Walk KC, like most of the folks around the region, they know who we are, and when we show up to something, they know what we're there to talk about. I will say that on the whole, I think we've developed a pretty good rapport with most electeds and staff. But there's always the skeptics, and there are definitely people who don't like what we're about, and that's fine. They can pound sand. The thing that I would just say is that residents have significantly more power, not only because you're not typically expected to be there, but also because if you take the time to really think about your ask and you research and you take the time to really know what you're talking about, that makes you so potent as an advocate for something because, like I said, the electeds expect us. They expect me and Eric, like at meetings and things like that. But when everyday folks like you show up and you're asking, why are we not connecting with this plan called This Is a Priority? You know, we've had 17 crashes here over the last 2 years. Why are you not instituting a road diet? That matters because it shows that residents are engaged, they're locked in, and more importantly, it shows that electeds really have to respond to that organic need for something better in a community.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I'll echo a lot of what Michael just said. You know, we also try to maintain a pretty decent relationship with our city and the staffers who are doing the work. But yeah, like we've you know, established this network. I believe Cleveland's similar, and I'm not exactly sure how KC's organized, but of neighborhood focused bike ped committees. You know, they are resident driven, but we sort of provide them the tools and the know-how on, you know, how to advocate for themselves. Because like Michael said, like they expect us to show up to this stuff, but it's so much more powerful when it's residents that are doing it. You know, we do have some of our like sort of higher level you know, advocacy campaigns such as major policies. You know, we last year we got a Vision Zero policy for Pittsburgh. I mentioned the Complete Streets policy, getting a new bike plan, and also like some bigger picture. A lot of the those things I mentioned earlier, the infrastructure improvements I mentioned earlier, we sort of took the lead on those. But a lot of the things are small time crosswalks, you know, changing the light cycle, maybe like a traffic calming in on a neighborhood, fixing an intersection, and we just simply couldn't be everywhere all the time. So we developed this network of bike ped committees. And then, you know, because we've been so in this world for so long, we really understand how, you know, the sausage is made, so to speak, and to make sure that people can use their voice in the most effective way possible. We don't want them yelling at the mayor about something when the best person to talk to is, you know, their council person or the DPW director. Like we want them to be really thoughtful about who they're advocating to. as well as like what they're advocating for. Like if they really want a bike lane in their neighborhood, like, a lot of people know where they want that bike lane, but it often helps to explain, well, this is already in the bike plan, so let's go for something in the bike plan. So we really teach them kind of how to be most efficient with their time, limited time, and energy, and also just to be able to get something done, because it's so important to have those small wins, to help build momentum. But as far as like the major ways we include people, residents in our advocacy work, another thing we really encourage people to do is get involved in the capital budget process, for the city. We've like it's a cycle every year, and it's very opaque for a lot of people. We've really spent a lot of time figuring out that process so that we make sure that all of our neighborhoods every year are sending letters to their council people asking for this stuff, asking for bike infrastructure, ped infrastructure, traffic calming. And every year it ends up being some of the most requested items from everybody in the city, any specific thing. And so that's also powerful too. So I think we've been able to maintain, a pretty decent level of support within our capital budget every year. Um, you know, we're a city with limited resources, needing to cut budgets every year, just like everybody, in this call. And but it's been pretty impressive, I think, the level that we have been able to maintain, funding within the capital budget for these projects, which has been really, really hugely helpful. And people do understand that they might not get what they're asking for, but they do help grow the overall pie. And often they do get some things, like some of these council people do want to deliver, good projects, and if they agree, then they will help support it. So that's been a really important piece of our advocacy efforts.
And
So Mike, raise your hand for a
you-
sec.
I was just going to add on, like, 1,000% agree with Eric about the budget process. Our proposed draft budget for KCMO is actually dropping on Thursday, and we have our fingers crossed that KCMO currently has a line item for Vision Zero funding, and we're hoping that we'll get an increase of that in this upcoming budget cycle. But ensuring that we get that is so important for residents to show up to those public budget hearings. So just last year, we were able to get funding raised from 500,000 for Vision Zero to 4 million, and we were able to get the 7.5 million that was allocated for sidewalks bumped up to 15 million. And we were able to do that with maybe 10 people showing up and speaking up for sidewalks. So if everyone here shows up at just one meeting, that really does make a difference. And it is so much more important at the local level, because when you're talking about federal engagement, you're talking about you need hundreds of thousands of residents to speak up for something. At the state level, you're talking usually tens of thousands. At the city or county level, it can literally be tens of people, like 10, 20 people speaking about a very specific thing that gets an elected's attention and really gets them to invest in the things that I think we all want to see.
Yeah, I'll say Cleveland's capital budget process is like murky and doesn't even necessarily happen every year, but sometimes it kind of does. And last year, it was a matter of some of our city contacts saying, hey, we like just got our draft capital budget. We didn't even know this was coming. It was like out of nowhere. City employees didn't even know. And so we've started having conversations like, how can we make this a little more transparent and make sure people can have some input? And this comes after a very a public budgeting ballot initiative that ended up failing, but only by a tiny bit, that I think really demonstrated how much people want to be more involved in the budgeting. So I think something that I've heard a lot and struggle with myself is like balancing data and personal stories, and kind of when to utilize what, and like how people respond to those two different things. I'm curious, like, is there one that you guys lean on more, or is it just striking the right balance between the two? Tell me about personal stories versus data.
I can start on this. So I think we do advocacy training, and you all are invited to that whenever we post that later this year. There is a virtual one that we'll probably do. One of the things that we often tell people when they're, figuring out their testimony is to use both. So start with a story that kind of encapsulates why an issue matters to you. I'm talking to you because I have a friend who was injured trying to cross the street that didn't have a crosswalk. This street is on a corridor where we have seen 250 crashes over the last 10 years and 10 fatalities. That's where you bring the data piece in. And then those pieces together help you to paint a picture that says, this is something that matters. It is something that is a prevalent issue. And then I'm going to ask you very specifically, I want you to install a safer crossing along this street. So you have the story that kind of introduces it, grabs their attention, the data that shows that it's not just you, it's a broader issue, and then the very specific ask. I think that the big thing that people struggle with isn't necessarily whether they choose data or stories. I think you can get by with either. It's that a lot of times people forget to have a very explicit ask. I'm asking you to vote yes for this ordinance. I'm asking you to oppose this measure. So whatever you do, always make sure that you have a very explicit ask at the beginning and, more importantly, at the end, so that whoever you're talking to, whether it be an elected or staff, knows this is what this person was asking for.
Yeah, that's very real.
Thanks, Michael. I'll add I consider data and stories both tactics toward your goal. And sometimes, one does work better than the other. And like Michael said, sometimes both work great. But one of the benefits of our world is, there isn't a whole lot of data out there. So if you are the ones who collect that data and sort of coalesce it and put it together and visualize it, you can also sort of tell that story, what that data means, and be the ones who make the headline for it. We've seen this work. We publish for instance, like the bike, the standard American Community Survey bike or commuting data, node share. And it for the whole country, it doesn't look all that impressive. Most cities are in the under 2% range for bike commuters. But we're able to put that together and sort of create the narrative that we want to tell about it. Like, oh, Pittsburgh, doubled in bike commuters in the past 10 years. Okay, so we went from 1% to 2%, but that's the story. And so we're able to get that out there, and then maybe a media person will pick that up. It's just about being able to use data for what you want. Another I think important thing for data is that you want to be able to find out what people are upset about, and often it's cars going fast. Everybody hates cars going fast, so obviously, crash data can help you make the case. But there's other ways that you can also make the case, especially in neighborhoods that don't get investments much. You can prove that like a neighborhood has been underinvested and they deserve sidewalks. And so there's ways that you can use that data for I think it's just being nuanced and making sure to use the data to best show what you're trying to prove, if that makes sense. But stories always are one of the best ways to really draw the heartstrings, though. And so we do use stories as well, especially in our bigger campaigns where we know if there's business owners who are against a project, then we make sure to tell stories of people who shop there. And I mean, that's all pretty obvious stuff, but I think it is really important, and that is the stuff that we see on, at least on social media, does get a little bit more play and sharing.
And what I'll add to Eric's point is data can be really potent when when you know who your audience is or know who you're trying to convince. So like one of the council members that we have in KCMO, he comes from a labor background. He cares a lot about jobs. We know that I can give him health stats all day. It's not really going to phase him. But if I can specifically show, kind of to Eric's point, that this many people shop here, that this many people don't have access to jobs because there is not a good sidewalk or bike lane here. That ties into an economic argument that you make. So the data piece is important. You absolutely should try to work it in where you can, because it gives you some professional heft to what you're trying to say. But as much as you can tie it to the specific issue that your audience cares about, that will make it much, much more, that will make it stick a lot more effectively.
Yeah. And this will be my shameless plug for the next advocacy training session, which is using public data for advocacy on February 24th, Monday, here on Zoom. Okay, I'm curious, when you know when to escalate your campaigns, when do you know that it's time to like stop just having like meetings with some decision makers and it's time to like start a petition? Or like how do you what when a resident comes to you, even like Leah, for example, Michael, like, how do you know when to be like, okay, we need to ramp it up? And with like that kind of same how do you know like when to change your language? Like what are some signs to you that it's like, okay, we need to stop being so nice and start being a little more maybe aggressive with the way that we are talking about this issue?
Sure, I'll go first this time. I think I went second last time, so yeah, I can't say that there's a cookie cutter response to that. It really does depend on the campaign and depends on what we're trying to achieve. We do really try to take advantage as much as possible of opportunities. Like I mentioned earlier, like, well, the bridge falling down is weird, but like a complete reconstruction of like a major road. But also if there's like, we really try to take advantage of the public process as much as possible. So that will dictate, when we might need to like launch a petition signature campaign, for instance, because we want to make sure to show up to the public meeting with an impressive list of signatures. So we do want to have that spectacle part of it as well, which does involve taking advantage of those those opportunities that arise. But also, we've run into situations where we find out that there is an opposition organizing, and so that's also a time to ramp it up, because often the opposition, we've seen straight up misinformation being posted on flyers or in websites and stuff like that, and so we know that's the time to really put out the counter narrative, because we do have, we know we have a bigger a bigger megaphone, so to speak, and are able to help set that narrative. And but then there is the obvious, so you also have to the other one that always comes to mind is tragedy, unfortunately, is another thing that really obviously gets people activated. And people are looking for someone to help harness that that energy, and that has also been helpful. I hate to say that, but it has been a way to also get things done. And I'll leave it at that for Michael.
Yeah, I agree with Eric. I think that as much as we want to, talk about the joy of having transportation choice or of having a safe place to walk or bike, the reality is that the other reason we do this work is because I know I don't want to speak for Eric, but I can tell from my own personal experience that the worst part of my job is having to console someone whose loved one has been injured or killed on a street that we knew was unsafe. That's the stuff that eats at me and keeps me up some nights. So I agree that you have to be willing to escalate. You have to be willing to talk about these issues. And my philosophy about it is that as a whole, our country, our media system, so much fails to talk about active transportation and why it's important and why we have to invest in safer streets for everyone. And so when we talk about it, I don't necessarily see it as an escalation. I see it as us being honest in a way that a lot of people who aren't in this work don't always understand. And so I think going to kind of the central question Jenna asked of like when to escalate, I think that a lot of times for us, the escalation has come when we can clearly tell that we're hitting a wall. And to Eric's point, you can't there's not like a clear, like you've hit a wall, like a screen pops up and says, you've hit a wall, you should try a different approach. But most of the time when you're in this work long enough, you can tell like, okay, we're not making any progress here. We need to escalate. I think the other thing to keep in mind is how you specifically escalate can be just as effective as choosing when to do it. And so what we've found, especially the last couple of years, is we have a city manager in Casey Mo who is very supportive of walking and biking, but sometimes he doesn't move as fast as we want. The other thing that we know about him is that he very much likes media attention, and he likes positive media attention. So we know that he loves to post on Facebook and Instagram. And so we'll tell some of our members, and we don't have to do anything major with this. It's like, oh, he's posting about all the stuff that they're doing with resurfacing streets. Why don't we remind him about, hey, he should also be adding on protected bike lanes on some of those streets that he's resurfacing. And sometimes it's just little nitpicking stuff like that that's enough to get his attention and like get him on the phone. Like, why are your people doing this? It's like, well, they're only doing what you're not doing for them. So, and we sometimes will play dumb just because it's a line of us still being professional. So like we still want to be professional, but it's also like we're not afraid to nudge people when they need to be nudged. So all that's to say, like, you can't always tell when you need to escalate, but you can figure out based on who you're trying to convince how to escalate effectively, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very relatable, Michael. I think there are people on this call that I've specifically like DM'd on Twitter and been like, hey, can you respond to the tweet that the mayor just put out? Because it hits a little different when it's not necessarily coming from the bike people. Okay, I have some more questions, but I'm going to open it up to everyone because I feel like they might overlap with some questions that people have in the room. So let's do raising hands, either physically on camera or if you know how to do it on Zoom, for questions in the room. Don't be afraid to ask anything. Or if there's like a specific campaign that you guys, Lucinda, go for it.
Question popped into my head after Michael was giving his introductory speech. He said that he got council support for protected bike lanes. And I want to know how he got that council support, and also maybe to overcome some of the other obstacles like the merchants who say, no, this will take away my business.
You're muted. I'm sorry.
Sorry. I will say that the first part of that answer is we have a champion on our council. It's actually my former boss who serves as a council member now, who's also named Eric, who is very supportive and has worked to build kind of a coalition of support among the council. Having that expertise and having that champion who's willing to stick out and say, I'm willing to do this, has it made him kind of be seen as kind of the bike ped guy on council? Yes, but that also means that 9.5 times out of 10, when the council has a question about a bike ped project, they're going to him and he's going to give them a reason to support something. I think the other part of it is building support among the council really starts at the candidate level. So a good chunk of this current council were folks that we had worked to build relationships and rapport with when they were candidates. So meeting with them, talking about the priorities in their district, telling them about some of the residents who support their priorities. Connecting the dots with them before they even get on council means that they go in knowing not only what we're about, knowing that we're a professional resource that they can trust, but also knowing, hey, if I want to get wins that address these concerns so they're not yelling at me and nudging me on Twitter or Instagram, these are the things that I can work on. So it's a lot of kind of showing them the path and then enabling them to follow the path, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question, Lucinda?
Yes, very helpful.
I think with that, I would be really curious to hear from both Michael and Eric more about your like political advocacy, because we are entering election year for all of our Cleveland City Council and mayor. So how do you guys navigate that and what do you do?
I'll go. So we've since I don't even know how long. I'm gonna say 12 years or so. We've always had our we polled the candidates with the same, do the whole question Q&A thing and then post it on our website. We have a pretty popular website, so we know it gets them traffic, and for the most part, we have a really good return rate on it, and also there's a really good maybe bad return rate for people who don't fill out our survey don't tend to get elected also. Now, I know correlation doesn't equal causation, but that there's a lot more to it than just that. But a lot of the candidates know it's coming and do participate. And we found that really helpful, not only get them on the record, but also help introduce us to them and get them, thinking about these issues. And it does get play on Reddit, it gets play on the internet. People see, conversations happening around it. And so that's been a really important thing. And then we also, just at the beginning of every year, we try to organize just one-on-one meetings with our executive director and each council person, and we prep, a little, like basically a cheat sheet for them. How many bike lanes are in their district? How many of this are in their trails are in their district? What the major projects that we're looking to see happen, what we're hearing from the community. And we just kind of really just try to hand them that information as, cleanly and neatly as possible for them so that they can be like, oh, okay, these are, because they don't know everything either, and so you're able to hand them the information, so that, in the hopes that as they see these things, as they hear people talking about this, then maybe they're going to be, they're going to think about that meeting we had with them and then act on it. And then we also, the mayor is its own beast, and the mayor election, we have a mayor election coming up this year, mayoral primary. There is a challenger to our current mayor. So that's always a struggle, and sort of like walking on eggshells. You don't want to we have to be very careful about not supporting any one candidate. But when one candidate's doing something that we like, for instance, like a Division Zero policy, it's difficult to sort of navigate that, that maze, so to speak. But so our job is to make sure that the incoming candidates are also in support of that kind of stuff, and so that they're not, putting that, that's part of their agenda as well. I'm sure I'll come up with more stuff in a sec, so I'll let Michael talk from here.
Yeah, I think most of what Eric mentioned is pretty similar to what we do. We do candidate questionnaires, and we've done candidate forums in the past too. That takes a little bit more work, and we typically don't do those until after the primaries, just because there's not enough space and time to be able to do it with all of the candidates. With that said, I think that as much as you can, kind of going to your elected early, and just kind of making it known, like, this is what we're about. I think there's a lot of times, and I think I've seen this a lot recently, that a lot of Bike Walk KC's work when working with electeds, especially newly ones, is demystifying, because I think there's this misperception sometimes that we're only focused on one thing, when what we're working on is really a spectrum of different things, all of which tie in with the priorities that someone may or may not have coming into a city council. I think the other thing that I'll say is that it is not foolproof, and I will be very candid. This is one of the areas where I think we've struggled a bit, is that there are electeds, especially on the city's east side, which is predominantly lower income, predominantly uh, Black and Latino, where we have had some of our staunchest opposition. And that has largely been because the initial conversations that we had really soured because of some of the decisions that the electeds over there made. So a lot of it is doing your best to put your best foot forward, but also working to try to gird against any potential blowback or opposition that sometimes you can see it coming a mile away, and sometimes it comes from out of entirely left field, and you're like, what the hell is this? So yeah, so it's a lot of it is, especially with electeds, is preparation as best as you can prep, but also acknowledging that electeds are people, and sometimes people are very fickle beings.
I'll add one other thing is that, on what I mentioned earlier, how we presented them sort of like the white paper on what, our agenda is and what our priorities are in their district. We also want to portray ourselves as a resource to them as much as possible, understanding that they're not experts in the subject and we are, and also understanding that they're going to get a lot of complaints about, traffic calming and cars going fast. And we want them to come to us to be like, oh my God, I got so many 311s this week over, this street after this crash or whatever. Help us, and so we want to be as helpful as possible. And I think that's been a help, that's been part of some of the successes we've had. It hasn't always worked, yeah, like to echo Michael, I don't want to be that this is rosy and we figured it all out. We still struggle with a lot of, council districts and council people as well. But, I think portraying yourself as professional and a resource for them, goes a long way.
And what I'll say really quick is this is another place where residents really come in very important here, because especially when you have those sometimes antagonistic relationships with electeds, it really can make a difference and at least limit the damage if you have residents from that council district who are going and saying, I don't care what Bike Walk KC says. I'm telling you as a resident, I want more bike lanes in my district. I want better sidewalks. It disarms them, because I think sometimes there's this perception that, we're just there to just push and just be antagonistic, and it's not that. It's that we're doing this because we don't want people to get injured or killed. And sometimes we can't be the ones that say it because it just goes in one ear and out the other. But when a resident says, hey, I voted for you, I'm expecting you to deliver on this priority because you said that it was a priority, that is sometimes the come to Jesus moment that you need to have to get people to at least back off and loosen their opposition a little bit.
Yeah. Any more questions from the room? Yeah, Mandy. And then Patrick. Oh, Mandy, I can't hear you. I see you're unmuted, but if you can't get it to work, you could also throw it in the chat. Sorry about that. We'll go to Patrick first real quick.
Thank you. Do you guys get involved in the master plan updates for the city? I know that that's something we've done for our city in every 10 years. If we can either get ourselves into the master planning committee or have residents go and advocate for it, and maybe what you think the importance of that is.
Yeah, I'll jump in really quick and say, yes, we help with master plans. The climate protection resiliency plan was another big thing we got involved in. Yeah, I think and it's important to get folks involved there too, because as much as you can, trying to kind of permeate active transportation into other realms really makes it to where you're not having to just fight on this one area. It's dispersed. And so if you have more climate supporters for biking and walking because it addresses GHG emissions, if you have more economic people who are supporting it because it's good for business, if you have more school folks who are supporting it because it helps with students' attendance rate or things like that, having your hands and your involvement in multiple areas of plans, not just transportation centric plans, but just kind of other plans that are tangentially related, it really does help you to, one, make sure that your priorities spread out across the city, but also it can be a really good way of building coalition partnerships with organizations that on the surface may not really seem to care about biking and walking.
Yeah, I'll say absolutely we get involved in as many of those kind of plans as possible. It's also a way for us to demonstrate that we can get people to show up for really nerdy kind of like, things that most people aren't really that excited about, and our people show up and they're very excited about it. And that, I think that does touch some of the planners themselves as being like, oh wow, okay, we better incorporate some of this. But they also know that we're going to show up. Which I think has helped us then be asked to be on some of the steering committees of these plans, which has helped us make sure that we're obviously able to get things that we want in there, but sometimes we are like, because we're involved in so many of these planning efforts, we often have more knowledge about all the other plans that are happening around town than some of the planners themselves. And so we might be like, over there, they have a complete streets policy. You better have a complete streets policy in your plan. Otherwise, you're not gonna match the other plan. And it's funny that you asked that because Pittsburgh has never had a comprehensive plan, like for the whole city itself. They are just launched, like literally, last Thursday. Our mayor launched an effort to have our first comprehensive plan. Now he's the third mayor since I've been doing this that has launched a comprehensive planning effort. None of them have succeeded in taking a full plan across the finish line. But this one did just launch and we are on the steering committee for it.
Awesome, thank you. One of my understandings is that if you have those bike infrastructure pieces in the master plans, that when your grant writer goes to write grant requests, that it gets extra points when they can point to it in a master plan, and it makes it more likely they're going to get the grant to actually implement the infrastructure.
Yes.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's definitely been our experience. And I think it just makes your advocacy a lot easier because you can point to this plan that's been vetted, by whatever, like our bike plan. We can point to that. Council voted on it. Like it's you guys all voted on this, so here's the plan. So it
Implement
has
the plan.
that gravitas too.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that point. Getting to Mandy's question, how do we get drivers to care about sidewalks and biking? I think what has typically been most impactful is just making it personal. Like at some point, every driver is going to be a pedestrian. Like you're going to have to get out of your car to walk through a parking lot, to walk down the street. And so making it kind of personal in that regard, I think is something that's really helpful. I think another way that what we've seen work sometimes is explaining how investing in things like complete streets can actually alleviate traffic congestion. So it's not just us trying to take away your parking spot. It is us investing in these changes that will make it easier for everyone. Like that was one of the big things. We had a project in North Kansas City, which is separate from Casey Mo. That's a different conversation for a stronger drink. But the point was that they went through and built a complete streets project that included a road diet where they reallocated space for bike lanes. And one of the biggest complaints that people had early on was, well, this is going to slow up traffic. There's going to be a big traffic jam. They went and got data and they were able to show that it added maybe 30 seconds to your commute, the entire stretch. Being able to point to that data and being able to say, it is not going to hurt you, you have to give it a chance, is something that I think people increasingly, at least in our region, are willing to listen to because we have local examples that we can say, we've tried this, it works, we can do the same thing here.
Yeah, sidewalk parking is hugely problematic here in Pittsburgh and our narrow streets. It's a major issue. I can't say we've figured it out. We have like a silver bullet or anything like that, but some successes we have had have been around infrastructure, infrastructure changes such as like traffic calming, for instance. You know, one of the reasons that people claim to park on the sidewalk is because cars go so fast down the street that they don't want their car getting hit. And so if we're able to like be like, yeah, we don't like that either. I see it seems like we have common ground here. Let's work on a solution so that cars go slower, the traffic is calmed, and you'll feel more safe leaving your car on the street and on the sidewalk. And so we've been able to do that in a couple of spots around town. Traffic calming tends to be pretty popular for most people, especially if they live on the street, that the traffic, you know, that is being traffic calmed. Now that's a really long, expensive way to you know, address that problem, but you know, it has worked in certain key situations and has also been we've been able to like use that as like propaganda, you know, for future things. You know, like, well, look, on Main Street, which literally I'm not just using Main Street as like a go-to. It was literally Main Street that we did this on. On Main Street, you know, we worked with them to install, you know, these bump out, this, that, so that people then went on the street, traffic crashes went down, cars are no longer parking on the sidewalk. It was like a win-win for everybody. So we're able to now point to those as like, you know, successful solutions.
Yeah, I think for us, like when you look at the data in Cleveland, at least, like most of the people that die on our roadways are people in cars. And so I think the city has done a good job of talking about that and how, like, you know, safe streets are great for everyone. Like, yeah, safety kind of being the big focus. Okay, it is 6:59. If someone has one last burning question, we can take it. Anyone?
Can I hop in real quick? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking, let's try and do this quickly, but as far as like data and all that stuff, you can put points on a map, you can do all that stuff, you can, you know, try and get your message out there as much as possible. But what have you found, like, is video effective? You know, like if you take video of your commute, if people send that in, or like, I'm thinking like if the mayor were to ride my commute every day, things would change very quickly, you know, but I know that that's not a reasonable thing to ask of the mayor, you know, but as far as trying to actually, like, again, a point on a map is one thing, like I do GIS for a living and like that says one thing, you know, but I guess how is a very powerful way, you know, pictures, video, like audio, like, I don't know, I guess what's your experience with that?
So I'll say that one of the things that we tried to do more, and we actually got to work with Bike Cleveland on this a little bit over the last year, was doing what are known as walk audits. Walk audits are where you take a group of people out and you walk along a given corridor to understand things like safety, land use, lighting, and we're able to use the findings from that to put together a report that offers recommendations. So it's beneficial for two reasons. First is that I'm a big believer that as much as you can get people out, even if it's for like 30 minutes or an hour, to just experience what it's like, it will always have a big impact. So I don't shy away from trying to get your city council member or the mayor to go out with you, even if it's just for a few minutes. But the other thing is being able to put logic behind the very valid feelings that people sometimes can't articulate into something, you know, cohesive. Like people will feel something, but they don't always know how to feel about a solution. And so walk audits have often been our way of kind of bridging that divide between the emotions that people rightfully feel about the status quo and how we can actually address those issues. So I definitely would say, Jordan, as much as you can, try to find ways to invite your electeds and staff to come out and experience the shortcomings of the built environment with you, because that is often the quickest way to get someone to pay attention. And I'll drop a link for a report that we actually did where we brought out MoDOT staff, and it really changed their views about some aspects of a project that they were working on.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We've also been incorporating walk audits, and it's a great way to invite council people to it. But to directly answer your question, I think it depends, on who your audience is. Video it can be very effective, but so can walk audits. So I think it's just like important to be thoughtful about, who your audience is, who you're trying to influence. Is it the public? Is it a business association? Is it a council person? And try to think of the best way to like make sure to influence them. And with walk audits, I'm going to put in one quick plug for the America Walks. Just announced that they're doing their walking college. My coworker Seth did it last year or 2 years ago, I guess. And it was he can't rave enough about how helpful it was to understand the importance of doing walk audits. And they sort of walk you through they walk you through the how, the why, and kind of it's an intensive like 6-month program. I think you're expected to commit about 5 hours a week to it, but it's been really helpful to help zero in your advocacy, and it's free if you can get into it. So I'll drop or whatever. I'm trying to find the chat. But it's been a really useful thing for us to to take part in that.
Thank you.
One other quick thing. And with that, we've been able to then sort of standardize our walk audits in a way that the city is now going to be accepting that data to go into their own databases and sort of decision making. And so that the walk audits enabled us to help have these conversations with the city to see what do they actually want, like what data do they want, what format do they want the data in, how can we get them the data that's actually helpful to them. And so that's been a helpful thing as well, so that goes into their overall decision-making processes.
Yeah. I did see Tamara unmute. If you had a question, I think we can hold on for a couple minutes.
Oh no, I just wanted to shout out to you, Jenna, because the last time I saw you was at the St. Clair Superior Development meeting that was at the rec center down on Superior. So nice to see you again. I'm going to take this information back to my board. Collinwood is a pretty friendly bike area, but there's always room for improvement. And one of our community members has a bike club over here. So improvement definitely probably would increase the number of people who would come to the Waterloo area.
Yeah. And I'll be emailing you info about our Collinwood Better Streets Committee meeting at the end of the month, which I'm very excited about. Awesome. Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eric and Michael, so much. If anyone wants to revisit this, we'll have it posted on our YouTube. And yeah, I'm always around to answer questions, and I'm sure if you have any questions for these guys, like, let me know and I can forward them along. They're a wealth of knowledge. So everyone, let's give a little applause to our friends in Kansas City and Pittsburgh. I hope we're able to make y'all proud in the next few years. All right, thanks everyone. We'll see you February 24th, Monday evening for using public data for advocacy back here on Zoom. Thanks, guys.